Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We give you 3 short stories, 1 big story, and wins and losses. This Sunday has been a long Sunday as we had our gather where we get some of you all to meet in person to talk about actions we can take, build community. And so it is Sunday afternoon, and usually I'm already done editing the podcast by this point.
So this is going to be an even longer day for
Exactly.
you. I'm hoping to fit in a little bit more of Main Street Arts Festival
Look
after
at
this.
that.
Thankfully, I don't have any editing duties.
Yeah, exactly. Gets to live the dream.
Hopefully, I'll try not to cough and cause, all the things that cause you problems with editing.
Well, I know there's 3 short stories, 1 big story, and that big story is an interview with Daryl Davis II, who's running for Council Seat 6. And so we have a great conversation with him. But before we dive in with him, obviously there's still a lot of buzz and energy around anti-DEI. And so that pressure that you're seeing from Columbia, Harvard, you're now also seeing it here right locally with TCU. And TCU cuts its diversity and inclusion office amid cuts from their funding. TCU is expected to receive $17.4 million in federal grants and $23.6 million in direct payments from the federal government in fiscal year 2025, which runs from October 1st, 2024 through September 30th. Brandon Rottinghouse, a University of Houston political science professor, says he doesn't see the ending of things like this. Also, I see that The Economist has made this their big story on their pages around, why should we be concerned here when you talk about universities like TCU, like Harvard, like Columbia, who have endowments, who have, financial capital to maybe be the people fighting back against federal control on their education systems. But that doesn't seem to happen. What you're seeing is that they're either, quote unquote, managing and moving people around to not let people go, or they're just, if you're more of a state institution, unlike TCU, you're eliminating it altogether because you have to eventually get audited and submitted to now their new weird state requirements that Texas is trying to make higher ed do. And what is you've obviously seen TCU go through a lot of ups and downs with just narrative building.
Yeah, they were doing a lot of good work in this space. Yeah. I mean, they had some professors and some programs that were really being of great service to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive initiatives going on in their campus, and I think it was actually being quite beneficial to the students in the university and to the population as a whole. And we mentioned once before that as a private institution that they are not as impacted, but clearly they do get some federal grants. So they are looking at those dollars. But to your point about them having an endowment that could allow them to continue to do some of this work and not being under the thumb of having to take these words off of their websites and such, but that they've just gone ahead and been like, we're complying. We're just going to comply.
Yeah, I think the part that's one, what's interesting, the stories doesn't show. So for Harvard, they get $1 billion in federal funding, and their budget is $6 billion. So you're talking 18% of their funding on an annual basis comes from federal dollars. You're talking in the tens of millions for $17.4 million in federal grants and $23.6 million direct payments from federal government. Now that $23 million, I don't know if that direct payments from federal government, it's like FAFSA, grants and Pell grants that are just going to fund the students' tuitions, which if we're trying to attack those, that just would make sense. But let's just give it the benefit of doubt. Let's say all this $30 million is for operational costs at TCU. I imagine that's a big number of what they use to operate their university. You are talking about a university that has over $1 billion endowment. And I think that's where I'm I just think these institutions, you're going to have to you could have been heroic and take a Great Depression type hit on your financial systems. But what you would have had is freedom. What you would have had is the long-term gain of power. And I think, I think that's what's disappointing. Like, there's a lot of arguments where people are trying to make excuses for these institutions for not chopping back.
Well, I mean, the quote that jumped out at me was, "This is not Columbia, it's not Yale," said SMU political science professor Cal Jilson. It's TCU, for Christ's sake. And so the idea that TCU is sort of pursuing liberal indoctrination from the president and the chancellor's office on down is just nonsense. This is not what's happening at TCU.
You even see there's this Instagram called Black Menace, and he just goes on campuses and he does like talks.
I saw that.
Yeah, and when he talks at TCU campus,
he was asking them who they voted for in the last election. It was pretty
and
interesting.
What are they pronouns and all this stuff.
And they were a little taken aback with the pronoun question.
Yeah, so TCU is not raising our next generation of progressives. And that's what's like, to me, the annoying part of here. It's like, we know TCU is a predominantly right-wing kind of, because of Fort Worth is. And so what's annoying is, like, then you have Beau French and Nate Scatzline saying all the things where they're saying Texas Christian University is not a real Christian university and that they're doing all this woke DEI stuff. It's like, you're voting for these people. You're submitting to these people, and you're not making them happy. Like, so it's like, so there is another way out of this. And it's, you just have to maybe come on the other side of the aisle. And this is the aisle where Kamala Harris was 20 points higher in postgraduate. People with a postgraduate degree went 20 points to Kamala Harris. And I think you have to, like, I just feel like this is the opportunity to see, like, why do you keep going right when right is not, like, no matter what you do, TCU, they're not on board with you. Like, unlike Texas, University of Texas, you could stand up. You could do something. And again, do I think it takes a short-term hit? Yes, but you can ride that. You can ride that financial wave into the other side.
Yeah, it says basically private institutions are largely sheltered from interference at the state law level, and still they haven't shielded the school from political pressure because they're obviously caving to this pressure.
Another story in this kind of mix is Tarrant County College for the last 15 years was supporting a black high school competition ran by the NAACP, which organized a competition where black high school students compete in a range of competitions from choir to cooking, STEM to filmmaking. This year, more than 50 students competed. However, this local NSC chapter has been organizing the program since 1991 and since the late 2000s at TCC South Campus. But this year, they have to change venue due to TCC being afraid of the ramifications of having this tradition and having this organization on campus.
So I think in the past they sponsored it by not charging the levels that they would charge normally. So as a financial sponsor, they were just offering their space. And in order to stay within compliance as a state institution, because they are not a private institution, they at the last minute, I think, realized that if they did sponsor, they'd be breaking those rules. And so they made it clear that they would not be able to participate with the in-kind contribution of their space, and that they at the last minute provided an invoice from TCC for $5,800 for the day-long event, which was tenfold increase from what they've typically had to pay in recent years. So with that very last minute notice that this was going to be the case, they had to scramble to find another location to have the event.
It's just really disappointing, because who is going to stand up to this fascism, Russia-like regime that Donald Trump and Governor Abbott is creating? You see the folding of where you had the same social media websites that fact check for COVID are now the same media sites who are sitting behind Donald Trump kissing the ring. You have these higher ed institutions, which, if you look at them as an institution, are some of the largest powerful financial organizing entities, unwilling to stand up. And what separated America from China, from Russia, is that America was allowed to have free thinking conversations and talks about diversity, about freedom. You can say the president is a bad person. You can say, no, you can stand up. And now what we're doing by not standing up is saying that American ingenuity of free thought and free flowing ideas in our country is no longer allowed. And so it's the same people who are screaming they want independence, liberal freedom in Texas. This isn't that. If we're now having to have control, and we can't even have literally just a group of 50 kids who the NAACP, which is advancing people of color, it's not a DEI debate. It is just empowering black kids to get into science. And then we are not even strong enough to stand up on that. And again, all of our city leaders are quiet. All of the people who say they're not political and say that Fort Worth is a purple city, they're showing that they're afraid of their red counterparts. And who, if you guys don't stand up, then who?
And I mean, it basically says that the law is both specific and broad, and the penalties for noncompliance are really steep because the institutions could lose state funding for a year, and individual penalties, or an individual could lose their jobs. So it would be hard for an individual to stand up and sacrifice that if the penalty could be the loss of a job. And the institution has to be able to look at, like we said, the funding that they would be foregoing if they are deemed to be out of compliance, if they are indeed an institution that has to comply. So for us, we're looking at the institutions that don't have to comply, trying to figure out other ways to fund the important work that they have identified and were doing up to this point.
Yeah, and I think TCC, they can't really do much because they're so state funded. But TCU, I mean, the President Pullen there is enough progressive or liberal, moderate Democrats, and even modern Republicans who fund that university that he could pull people over and say, hey, you know what? We got to do something. We're going to stand up on values. We're talking $30 million. What can we do to not be a hold to all this? If you're going to act like that, then fine. We're going to do this. I think you could have got the dollars because you believe in free thinking. Universities are places for free ideology, thinking, advancing thoughts, bringing people together. And now you're just becoming a state-ran education system that has to say the values of the president. And I can't believe we're in 2025 and this is the way. I'm so thankful that I am not in college, have to go to college. We had a kid at the 817 Gather who's graduating school, and she's like, I'm trying to debate and decide, am I going to go to school in Texas? Because will I actually get a free, valued education? So it's like, it would be hard to expand your minds as a person when everyone's so afraid to stand up for themselves. So I know we spent a lot of times on short story number 1. Let's go ahead and move into short story number 2.
So short story number 2 was basically kind of revisiting something that we talked about on the last pod, which was that the county commissioners and the county judge are contemplating redistricting mid-cycle. Most of the time, redistricting happens after a census, and in 2021, after the 2020 census, the court that was in place at that time, which has quite a few different people than are currently serving on the court, had a firm look at all of the maps and determine that no redistricting was necessary because according to the criteria by which you must redistrict, if there is more than a 10% change or disbalance between the geographic districts 1, 2, 3, and 4 of County Commissioners Court, then you have to look at the lines and rebalance those districts so that each of them is within 10% of the other ones as far as their population served. So back in 2021, they analyzed it and chose not to redraw the maps. Normally, we would look at that again in 2030 after the 2030 census. And there has been a request by the county judge, and it passed at the last commissioner's court meeting, to hire a firm not the same firm that was used last time redistricting was looked at in 2021, but a firm out of Alexandria, Virginia, to look at maps and contemplate redistricting in the middle of a census 10-year period. And that passed along party lines at the last commissioner's court. So while that vote to hire a firm to look at the maps moved forward, with a majority of the commissioners supporting it, there is believed to be some future actions that are coming up in order to either contemplate not moving forward with redistricting in this off period, or making sure that any redistricting that does occur is open and transparent and allows everyone to participate in a open and transparent manner.
Where everyone needs to get energized about this is that this usually happens at the census level, so every 10 years. So Tim O'Hare wants to spend the money now, right before he runs again, so that now these lines are made where you're talking about a 4-1 Republican in situation in county, where like a Commissioner Simmons, who's been the most active and the most progressive and standing up for her constituents of all backgrounds in her communities and standing up against Tim O'Hare. This is important because Tarrant County is one of the 20 most important counties in the country. And usually where Tarrant County goes, Texas goes. Where Texas goes, where Tarrant County goes also is where America goes. And, our county goes blue when Beto O'Rourke ran, went blue when Biden ran. And yes, this is the first time where it went Trump and the Republican, but it was also, a lot of people stayed home and didn't vote. And so you're talking about a purple city and a city that's becoming more reflected of more normal cities where there's more progressive ideas being challenged, where like something like this happens, it's going to hurt us for decades to ever be able to build real abilities for us to deal with the growth, deal with the diversity, deal with the overall needs that we all need for such a big land, size of a county. And so this is important. And it's also important because Fort Worth is supposed to be that kind of more progressive liberal voice against the county. But again, our city officials are so quiet, so afraid, and they're not standing up to anyone. And they should be against this. Like, this isn't about politics. This is about gerrymandering, doing things, could possibly get to a Voting Rights Act situation, and ACLU and other people like that getting involved, causing the county millions of dollars, like you've seen in Galveston, where they're in a 5-year fight because they try to redistrict. You have Fort Bend County trying to do the same thing. This is how you end up with a Keller ISD. Everyone shook what happened to Keller ISD. It was because when Keller ISD had Patriot Mobile dollars and all their school board became red Patriot Mobile people, you couldn't do anything. And then you stood up. Right now, we could do something as people. And you got to get this on your radar that Tim O'Hare is trying to hack the county so that it can never be blue again.
And the other issue is just the cost of all of this. To do this in the middle of the census, we're going to have to do it again in 2030 because that's required. And we're in the midst, there's been an article basically stating that Tarrant County laid off 63 public health staff due to federal cuts, and that number is growing. So we're adding costs to things that we're doing that are unnecessary in the midst of cuts that are necessary because of federal funding going down. A lot of those cuts are impacting public health. When you look at the cuts, we've had 25 programs in public health, 10 programs in housing, and 16 programs in community development at the county level that have all been impacted by these federal cuts that have required the county to scale back. If we need to scale back because of federal cuts and we're required to cut employment at the county level of the people who are providing services and benefits to citizens of this county around public health, around housing, and around community development, these are all things that impact our daily lives. And if you think the cuts have been bad with a 2-3 split on the county commissioner's court, I think that you will see these kind of cuts happening even more, because I think the answer that the Republican side of things is that they don't want to be doing these things at a government level, and they want to continue to cut these things.
Yeah. I mean, they're feeding the orders from their Tarrant GOP leader, who wants to remove all Democrats from the county. And this is the attempt to do so with like spending money that we don't have to. This is supposed to something we have to do when the census comes out every 10 years. And we're going to have to redo this again. And so you're talking about money during a time when you're talking about hundreds of people could be laid off at the county. This is something like we have to, like, we're going to have some action steps in the notes, but you need to like send emails, show up to court. We talked about this at the 817 Gather today. It was just like, was our first like call to action of us as a unit of like, how do we ensure that Tim O'Hare and, his, I guess, just warlings are not out here trying to really destroy the county, because Tarrant County is, if we can make Tarrant County a county for the people and the people have their voices heard, this is the linchpin to the overall belief and hope of Texas and our country. That's why I feel like over 5 years doing this pod, and people talk about, why do you do a pod about Fort Worth and Tarrant County, is because the minute we decide that all this is okay, to me is the chapter of we live in a state-ran regime, and democracy and freedom is no longer there.
And speaking of a state-led regime, if we're ready to move into our third short story, It is basically about some items that are before the state legislature that have impact on Tarrant County and Fort Worth specifically, because this issue of state versus local control, our legislature is looking to overturn downtown Fort Worth District's authority. So this is a bill that has been submitted by two representatives that are not even in communities that are impacted by what this bill would do. They represent Galveston and Plano, and this bill would overturn the management of public improvement districts in four of the state's largest cities: Fort Worth, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. So if you're not familiar with the fact that we have a public improvement district and a tax increment financing district in our downtown of Fort Worth called Downtown Fort Worth, Inc., and that organization has very successfully for years represented the property owners in the 543-acre public improvement district, which a self-assessed additional special assessment above property taxes is collected in that area to do good things for that area: beautification, security, further enhancing the downtown core in our city. This legislation is a wholesale abandonment of property owners' protections ensured by the state when the legislature authorized PIDs in 1987. And now they want to go back and say that instead of having local board members from the properties that are impacted serving on a board that makes these decisions, they would like to have a new 7-member board, including appointees by the governor and lieutenant governor and the House Speaker, be making these decisions about what happens in the TIF and PID districts of our four largest cities. I mean, we all know that the Texas legislature has been attacking local control for many, many years, but this is just over the top. And it seems to be like something fluffy and extra and nice that you might think is good for a downtown area because they're talking about beautification, but they're also talking about safety. And this is a situation where literally people in other areas of the state that don't have any tie to downtown Fort Worth or Fort Worth as a whole would be making decisions about what we get to do in our downtown.
The fastest growing places are liberal cities in Texas. The liberal cities in Texas are the biggest threat to the current language of Texas. And now they're trying to tell you what flowers and wall art and things you're going to be able to put in these cities. Again, this we have to realize I don't know where our capacity on the other side is, because it's not even like you can lawyer up in these things. It just feels like we're just going through this version of what is real and what are we going to stand up to, as this is a real part of our democracy or our country, of how we run. And it's just everyone is stepping through things that we not are used to and comfortable with. And I don't know if this is because they think they're going to lose the midterm, and they know that statistically they're going to lose the midterm. So they're just trying to be outside of their mind right now at so many levels.
Well, I mean, thankfully, our local representative who covers this area, John McQueenie, who's a first-term Republican in this seat in Austin, has said that he is looking to seek a compromise with the folks that have written these bills. He believes that Downtown Fort Worth Inc. has been doing a good job, and that they are, the standard bearer for doing this kind of work in our urban core cities. So hopefully he can have some influence, but I'm not sure what the motivation is, other than just trying to take local control away from cities that they think might be doing things that they don't want them to do.
And I don't remember, we were telling those stories about the chamber, where the chamber moved on and they hired some new guy, and they called it like a new organization called, it was like entrepreneurship, something. But the guy who led it came from Abbott's kind of chair. So it's like
It's the economic development arm.
Yeah.
So they decided to, instead of having the Chamber of Commerce doing both the economic development and the support of existing businesses in Fort Worth, that the local chamber would be more focused on the existing businesses, and this new economic development arm would, headed up by Robert Allen, I believe is his name, to do kind of more of that outreach and economic development and bringing other new businesses to Fort Worth. But he did work in Austin, which I would hope would benefit us.
But yeah, and if anything, I mean, Wells Fargo's not downtown. We lost Dickies. Like, what thing did he bring to downtown? What did he bring besides Greg Abbott having more power? It looks like, and it's like, was this a part of the whole game the whole time? And what I'm annoyed about Fort Worth, and what I'm annoyed about all these Republicans right now, it's like, y'all voted for this, and like, are y'all gonna sit around and act like this is ultimately what you want? Like, are you waiting for the power to shift, and that hopefully they give you a piece of bread that allows you to eat still? Like, is that what your strategy is? Because you don't have to pick this way. The city isn't as red as you think it is. Fort Worth goes blue. Fort Worth stands up. Like, you have the base to stand up against this. And, to me,
it's also just a real example of these bills that are filed that describe something so finite and minutely that it's clearly targeting certain cities. And the overall thing of this coming from representatives that don't even represent the cities that this is going to impact is super annoying to me.
Yeah.
I know that's backing off of what you were just discussing, but I wish that every bill that was filed came with a little paragraph that said representative's intention for filing this bill, and that they would have to spell out why they're doing this. I mean, there are certain bills that have been filed that I have reached out to my representative and said, what is your thinking behind this? And I've gotten some answers, but I have the ability, or I did, that person's not in that seat anymore, and I don't know my new representative yet, but I had the ability to literally text him and ask him, and I got an answer, but not the whole world doesn't have that. And so people who are going down to Austin to try to advocate for various things and against various things, we're guessing constantly. I was down there advocating for transit bills and transportation and safe streets, and we're like, what is making this person file these things? And we're just guessing.
Yeah. Well, we have some hope today as we get to have a passionate candidate running for District 6 City Council seat. Today we have Daryl Davis II. He is a former resident, born and raised in Fort Worth, comes from East Side, grew up in Stop 6, went to church in Como, and also is the president of the school board at Crowley. And he is looking to step into Jared Williams' seat as Jared Williams decided to not run again. He has Jared Williams' endorsement, and today we get to have what I believe is the first real one-on-one conversation to get to know Daryl a little better. So here is Daryl Davis.
my Fort Worth story is every story of my life. I am born and raised in the city of Fort Worth. As we like to say, I was born and raised in Stop Six. So I'm an East Side boy. I've lived in this city all my life, and I have so many just variations of what my experience in Fort Worth has been like. I can think back to the days growing up in Stop Six at a time when our street wasn't paved, and I remember when they came through and started paving the street, and they put these rods down and things like that, and we used to race barefoot. That was just a thing, and I remember getting one of those stuck in my foot when they were coming and paving Lena Street, and had to get a tetanus shot. That's when I learned about tetanus shots. And so I mean, all of those are just things that I've experienced. I can also remember just what it was like growing up in a community where you knew your neighbors, and we knew Miss Renfro, who lived down the street, and Miss Bohannon, who lived across the street, and it really was a situation where when we didn't have, there was someone who would share. And so that really is what shaped my perspective of just what it means to be a neighbor, that you step in and you help out when necessary. You celebrate the wins with other people. You also experience the losses with them as well. I remember having friends that lived down the street and around the corner, and we would walk to Ernie's grocery store on Amanda Street. And, that was the essence of a grocery store for us. And so there were times when we didn't have much. My parents, my grandparents, my mom would say, go up to Ernie's grocery store and, here's $5, get, a half a pound of pressed ham, a quarter pound of cheese, and a loaf of Mrs. Bear's bread. And that was probably dinner, for a few days at least. I'm a product of Fort Worth Independent School District, and I was one of those school dependent children. So I have an appreciation, even when I think about students today in my service on the Crowley School Board, that many of those children, I was one of them, and so when I see and I hear how we are moving away from ensuring that students have all that they need, I take that very personally. Because I know that if it had not been for the reduced and free lunch programs, that I would not have had a hot breakfast and lunch most days. And so those are just a few of the little things growing up right here in Fort Worth that has just shaped me into who I am today.
Yeah, I would love to know kind of when did activism start for you? When did you turn into like, oh, I'm going to do something to help others?
You know what? It's always been a part of who I am. So my grandparents were my world. I called my maternal grandparents Grandmama and Pawpaw, and every weekend I was at their house. We went over there, after school, because I attended M.I. Logan Elementary, right in Stop Six, and so we would walk to Grandmama and Pawpaw's house, and they were everything to me. And I used to sit out on the porch with them in the evenings, and Papa would burn trash in the front yard. I didn't know that was illegal, but that's just kind of what we did, right? Papa said it helped keep the flies away, and
that's why we got plastics in our brain, right?
So, but they would sit on the porch and just talk, and sometimes they would talk about politics, particularly about voting. And I just knew that was a responsibility that we had, just to vote, and to just be involved in the community. And so I can't really say when it started. I know when it crystallized, though. It was in my adult life. Really, back in 2017, when Ms. Jacqueline Craig was had her unfortunate experience with Fort Worth PD, and I remember just looking at that situation and realizing that's here in Fort Worth, and it took me back to my own experience that I had one time. My cousins and I, again, went to M.I. Logan Elementary, walking down Ramey Street. Sometimes, as kids, we would just decide to race, and it was just 1, 2, 3, go. And everybody would just take out running. Well, I remember one day in particular, we were walking home from school. decided we were going to race, and a Fort Worth police officer was driving by. And all of a sudden, as we're running down the street, cherries and blueberries, whoop, you know, and he asked us, he said, "What are you all doing?" And we were just like, we're going home. But he felt and assumed that because you had this small group of black kids that were running, that obviously you all were doing something you didn't have any business doing. And I remember the fear that I had that day. And so coming back to 2017, when I thought about that situation with the late Jacqueline Craig, it brought all of that back up. And I then began to realize this is not the way that it's supposed to be, right? As a child, I should not have experienced that. As an adult, Miss Craig and her daughter should not have experienced that. And what I felt was no one, the representative at that time in that area did not stand up for her. And so I decided that I would. And so that's what led me to really immerse myself in the standing up and advocating for people. People who felt like their voices weren't being heard, who felt like no one was listening. Those are the voices that I decided that I was going to start working to amplify.
How would you assess where Stop 6 is today? I mean, from you as a kid to now, do you feel like it's gotten any more economically better? People are in a better situation today. Do you feel like it's a flat line? What's kind of your overall take of Stop 6 today?
You know what? I would say it's somewhat of a flat line. There is there is some development that is happening in Stop 6, and I'm happy to see it. But at the same time, it bothers me a little bit because, of course, when you have, my grandparents' house, I mean, that house was probably back in that day worth $15,000 maybe. So to see that house is still standing, I actually still have family members that live in that house with the water cooler and everything still there, the Dearborn heaters and whatnot like that is still very there. But then you have a $300,000 house right down the street. And so it's beginning to make it a little bit more difficult for people who've always known neighborhoods like that to continue to call them home, just because the cost is increasing. But for the most part, some of the same small, independently owned stores, grocery stores, they're still there. Not much has changed. When I look at Ramey and Stall Cup, which was probably the largest thoroughfare right there in Stop 6 for us when I was growing up, same buildings that are still there. Some are vacant now. So there's not a lot of economic development that is happening there in Stop 6, but the sense of community still is there. Dunbar High School is still the heartbeat of that community. Now, I didn't go to Dunbar. I was.
Where'd you end up going?
I graduated from Poly High School. My parents let me go to Poly. I was in the magnet program, and I wanted to study finance and communication. So I was the first person in my family on both sides that did not go to Dunbar. But that is still the heartbeat of that community. And so you still have that sense of community there. But from an economic standpoint, most people in Stop 6 have to drive and hit the loop 820 to go and get the services and the things that they need.
Well, you're running for District 6,
yeah.
And that's not Stop 6. You're
right.
now out to the Crowley area. Tell us about Crowley. How did you get to Crowley? I oftentimes, as someone who lives in the Loop, don't know a lot about the Crowley community. Can you kind of talk about how you got there, the scene, how you started getting involved there, and what is it like to be in Crowley?
Yeah. So again, I'm an East Side boy, and I lived on the East Side for 30 years of my life, maybe a little bit more than that, because I bought my first home there on the East Side, not necessarily in Stop 6, but just Stop 6 adjacent, after I was married at the time, had now 2 children, we decided that we probably needed a little bit more space. And so just my heart, my mind was to stay on the east side of town, but we couldn't afford anything. And so good friend, almost big brother to me, who was serving as my realtor at the time, he just asked me to entertain an idea of looking on the southwest side of the city. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. Like, I mean, my
location.
Right.
I mean,
at
the first rule.
at that point, I am in my career, and I'm traveling. So, I mean, to get to DFW Airport in about 15 minutes it was heaven on earth. I can get downtown in about 10 to 12 minutes. If I had to go to Dallas, that was a short distance. And I'm like, man, you want me to drive all the way out here? But when I went out there, my daughter was with me at the time, and the house that I now live in, she actually picked out. And so that's where we ended up choosing to put down roots, and again, being from Stop 6, that sense of community was just kind of inbred in me. And so I just wanted to be a part of what was going on in that community, even though I was very new to it. And so I've been out in that area now for approximately 10 years. And I just began to connect with people and to just want to serve. And so
because Crowley Pride's also
Crowley Pride
a real
unified,
thing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so just when I chose to run for city council in 2019, that really began to connect me to even more people in the community, because for the first time, people felt like there was a viable option that was focused on neighborhood voices. And that is not to say anything disparaging about the previous person that served in office, but the overwhelming sense that I got was that people just wanted someone to listen to them. People wanted someone that was going to advocate for them. And that's what we were able to do just in that 2019 race. And I did not win, unfortunately. But what we were able to do was drive up voter turnout, because people actually had a sense of hope. Now I was outspent 4-1. I mean, that was my first time even running for public office, and I didn't know anything. I mean, and so,
talk about myself, but
No, you are.
it's a similar situation to me. Like, I was in a community that I always have wanted to be part of community. So your story about always being a part of a community and wanting to serve your community is the similar thing that took me to run for city council as well. And in my first race, I had no idea what I was in for. And the fundraising. And
oh my gosh.
You just think of it as like the extension of what you do in your neighborhood and your neighborhood association. And then you look and it's like 100,000 people that you have to talk to.
That's right. Absolutely.
So it's a lot more than just a neighborhood thing.
And I didn't know that. So you ran for off city council in 2019.
In 2019, I did.
And now you did school, but did school board. How did you decide that?
Yeah. So in 2019, I didn't win. Got 35% of the vote. And had, many people asked me, like, will you do it again in 2021? And I said yes. And just, I remained active, engaged, giving people an opportunity to be heard. Even when it came up, I know there was a previous episode when you all talked about CCPD funding and how that used to be renewed for 5 years, but I believe it was in 2020 that there was a vote to renew it for 10 years. And while I was not against the spirit of CCPD funds, I did have an issue with a 10-year period where there would be no further consideration. And so I kind of we were in the midst of COVID then. And so I did a virtual town hall and, what have you. Well, during that time, Dr. Williams was considering running for city council as well. And so after that virtual town hall that he was watching as well, reached out and we had a conversation, and he let me know that he was also considering running and whatnot. And just with where the district was at that time, it was a majority minority district. Yes, but there was not that groundswell. We were just kind of starting that tide in 19 that we were going to continue in 2021, but I knew that we were not in a place where we could where we would be able to have the overwhelming change that we needed if both he and I were in the race. And so I made the decision to say, what is most advantageous for our community and for our neighborhoods is not for us to run against the incumbent at that time, who I believe that was his 8th term. And so I graciously bowed out. And in that, I ended up running for Crowley ISD School Board in 2022. And so I was fortunate to win that race, and now we're coming to the end of my term.
Yeah. And it seems like, tell me the language and the communication between you and Council Member Williams to now endorse and support your candidacy for the seat.
Yes.
So it feels pretty full circle of y'all deciding at the front end, hey, you got it, and now to be here, and it seems like he's supporting you.
Yeah. The funny thing is, though, my intention was to run for reelection to the school board. We were doing great work. I was fortunate to receive the endorsement of my colleagues on the school board at that time. They voted me to serve as the school board president in my first term, which usually doesn't happen. But just in being a coalition builder, being a visionary, trying to get us to work together to actually get things done, they had a great sense of confidence in me. And so my intention was to run for re-election to the school board. And so I'd actually filed to run in the school board election on the first day of the filing period. Dr. Williams ended up saying that he would not seek election or re-election to the council. And my phone immediately began to ring. And my answer was no. Like, people kept asking me, like, we need you to go ahead and step up and run. No, we're doing great work on the school board. This is where my heart is. This is what I'm going to continue to do. It wasn't until, later that week that Dr. Williams actually himself reached out to me, and he said, we need to have a conversation. Because of course people were going to him and saying, well, Daryl is saying no, and he's saying no, and he's saying no. And I mean, I was adamant about my no. But when he and I began to just talk about where we were as a district and the work that had already been done, and just how we are still in this place where we cannot afford to go backwards. And we need someone who is going to be a champion for people over self-interest, over anything else. He was like, we really need this to happen. And the community and the neighborhoods really need you. And so I told him, I said, well, I'm still a no, but I'll take time to really think about it, pray about it, because faith is very important to me. And so I took that weekend and just really, mind you, my phone is still ringing. I wanted to have a conversation with my children. My kids love the work that I do on the school board. My son loves, Crowley ISD. But I wanted them to understand, what was being asked, and just to make sure that they were okay with it. Because, as children, I know we always got drafted into things, and voluntold that this was what we were going to do without really any consideration of what the impact was for us. So as a dad, and I try every day to be a good dad, I have those conversations with my children. And so in getting their blessing and talking to members of the community, elected officials, everyday neighbors, community members, I finally got to a yes. And it was when I got to that yes that Dr. Williams said, if you're willing to do it, I will support you. And so that's how we're here. But initially, I was just like, no, I'm good. Yeah. We're doing great work on the school board. Yeah.
So how old are your kids? Because that's an interesting question about checking in with your kids about doing this. Because when I first ran, my kids were 12 and 16.
Mine are 10 and 15.
Yeah. And I was told that they might be just a little too young for me to be taking this on, which I don't think that question gets asked of men often, that it's a question of a mom. So is that something that you took into consideration? Your kids are like excited about this prospect, and getting voluntold is also something that comes up a lot. Block walking.
Yes.
Getting stopped everywhere you go with questions about the city and what you're going to do.
All of that. And so, I didn't think that they were too young to have that conversation with them, because regardless, it was going to have an impact on them, and so I just wanted to make sure that we at least had the conversation, that they understood what it was going to mean. My daughter loves being, she and I have just so many conversations about politics, local, federal, statewide, different initiatives, all kinds of things. And so this was her jam, and her only thing was, she said, Dad, I just don't want you to lose again. Because she was there in 2019. She was there. We were block walking. She actually went to vote with me, for myself. Right. And she was really excited. My son was much younger then. So he wasn't as aware of all that was going on. But my daughter, she remembers that day. We had a whole watch party and everything, and, room filled with people, neighbors, community members who were excited about what we were attempting to do back in 2019. And as those results start rolling in, it was just devastating. It really was, because she knew the work that had gone into it, and all that, not only that I did, but that we did, and she was devastated. And so moving 6 years forward, her thing was, I don't want you to lose again, and I told her, I said, at the end of the day, we can't control the results, but we can control our efforts and our engagement. And that's what we're going to focus on. So yes, we are doing all of the things. We are working night and day just to try to make this happen. But at the end of the day, it's the will of the voters. So hopefully my daughter won't be disappointed, but we've already had that conversation.
Yeah. What would be some of your priorities for the district? How do you see the potential of the city kind of moving forward for your kids in the future?
Yeah. And honestly, creating the city that I ideally want to raise my kids in, that's my motivation. And I know that's the motivation for a lot of people that I've talked to just throughout the district and really all over the city. Because again, I am an East Side boy, so I still have, most of my family and long-term friends still live on the east side of the city. And but specifically for District 6, I don't approach public service as having the answers. Oftentimes people choose to become an elected official or public servant, however you want to categorize it, but ultimately come to it with what it is they want to accomplish. Well, my approach is a little bit different. I wanted to make sure, number one, that I heard the voice of the neighbors and the neighborhoods. So we did a series of community listening sessions, both in the southwest portion of the district, Lake Como as well. Our Lake Como event had more than 50 people that attended from right there in that community. And they really helped shape what it is that we were trying to accomplish. And number one, that was safer streets. Safer neighborhood streets. Really, we need considerable investments in transportation and pedestrian safety in District 6. As a school board president, I've had to make the phone calls to the parents. I didn't have to, but I chose to make phone calls to both of the parents of the students who were hit as they were trying to navigate the traffic circle there at McPherson and Summer Creek and were struck by vehicles. As a dad, that just broke my heart, to know that could easily be my children. These kids were leaving their local middle school, headed home, have to navigate through that traffic circle. And, thankfully, they both are alive. They're doing well. But that's a tragic incident that should not have happened. And so in addition to that, people who live on McCarter or kind of in the Meadow Creek area talk about the number of traffic fatalities that have happened just on that stretch of one of our local streets. So we've got to really make some critical investments just so that people can navigate safely throughout their neighborhood. Also, Fort Worth is getting more and more expensive to live in. So going back to my childhood, we knew we were poor. We just, it was just what it was, Some things just kind of became normal. I jokingly tell people all the time, I thought it was normal for people's lights to get cut off at once a month. I just thought it was a regular thing because it happened consistently for us. Because sometimes my mom had to make a decision. Am I going to pay for this field trip for my sister or I to go on? Or am I going to go ahead and pay this light bill on time? Are they going to have a good Christmas this year? Or are we going to float this water bill this month? And so that upbringing has created a passion in me to make sure that people can have as comfortable a life in Fort Worth as they want. And some people's level of comfort is different than others, but whatever that level of comfort is that you want, you should be able to experience that in this city. And so sustainable income for families is so important. I think that we can do some innovative things. The city of Fort Worth is one of the largest employers in the city. And when we begin to talk about wages that are paid in the city, I just think, and I'm crazy to believe that the people that serve our city every day should be able to live comfortably in our city, right? So part of that means making sure that we have fair wages in this city. And I think the city of Fort Worth can lead on that, which would then, because if you have, even greater talent, or, those people who are great at what they do, leaving private enterprise, coming to work for the city, well, guess what? Those corporations are going to have to increase what it is that they're paying. And so I think that there is an innovative way that we can make sure that people can comfortably live in this city. In addition to, we all need the city services that are provided, but those city services should not cause us, or paying for those city services should not cause us to not be able to have a comfortable life. And so I think we have to also make sure that we're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and, what have you, while also continuing to make sure that the things that the people rely on the city for, those things stay in place. And then lastly, District 6 is growing quickly. It is one of the fastest growing areas in our city. But I think there's a way that we can have smart, responsible growth. No offense to those listeners who live kind of on the north side of the city and, far north Fort Worth. We don't want those kind of infrastructure problems in District 6. And so I think it's unfortunate that oftentimes we have rooftops before we have roads. So I think some common sense approaches to even infrastructure and growth and development, I think are necessary so that District 6 is able to be what the neighborhoods collectively want it to be. And ultimately, I think that starts with prioritizing neighborhood voice, making sure that the people who live in the community and in the neighborhoods are able to have a say into what actually happens.
Yeah.
I think you answered some of the questions that I would have had in that response, because talking about walkable and transportation and pedestrian safety, I almost put on a t-shirt this morning about Vision Zero, which is something that I've been passionate about for many, many years. So part of me was like, did he do some research to find out what's important to Aunt Zeta before he came on the pod here today? But I think I've had some conversations with Councilman Williams about the fact that District 6 has some aging neighborhoods, some aging commercial, that all could be adaptively reused and reused in a way that provides that neighborhood fabric that you described, that you had in Stop 6 growing up, that there was neighborhood grocery stores that you could go to, and that things are walkable. So to your point about children having to navigate getting to and from school on infrastructure that maybe people are not quite used to, a traffic circle.
Traffic circles,
and a lot of times when people encounter a traffic circle, their answer to their not understanding how to go about is not to slow down, which is what you're supposed to do, but to speed up. That can endanger people. So I'm happy to hear your passion about those things. Because as we grow and provide more housing for more people and resources and things for more people, I think having thoughtful, smart growth around those things are going to be very important. So District 6 is interesting in that it is kind of some of your inner neighborhoods that are older, and then a lot of new growth in the Crowley area, which I've gone out and looked at now recently more than I ever have before. And then the fact that with redistricting, Como is now part of District 6.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting cross-section of people to represent.
Yes.
So what brought you to believing that your connections and the way that you have been raised and lived in Fort Worth to the belief that you're the person to represent this pretty diverse and interesting mix of constituents that have varying needs and probably varying ideas, to your point about wanting to reflect what the neighbors and the citizens want?
Absolutely. So though I was an East Side boy, the only time, so I-35, of course, we know is a divider in the city. Okay. And so I grew up east of 35. The only thing that I really had a relationship with or a connection to west of 35 was Lake Como, because that's where I went to church. From the time I was 14 years old up until, I don't even know at what point, I went to church in Lake Como. And so that community has always been special because it felt a lot like my community in Stop 6. Very holistic. You knew your neighbors. The one thing about Lake Como, that community has always been very active. politically. I mean, the unofficial mayor of Fort Worth for a long time was Miss Viola Pitts, because if she wanted something for Como, she made a phone call and it got done, but the Como community has always been really special because they've always been active, engaged, took ownership of their community. And the unfortunate reality was just the way that the districts were drawn at that time. Como really didn't have a powerful voice. So they were a powerful, mighty force. They just didn't have the numbers because they were surrounded by Ridgemar, Ridgely, and all those areas. And when you know the history of Como and kind of how that community came to be, why you had this very distinct community in the midst of all this other, you could understand the plight of the Como community when it came to civic engagement, particularly on the local level. So with redistricting brought an opportunity to for that particular neighborhood to feel like they had the opportunity to affect the change that they wanted to see. And so with redistricting, Como became a part of District 6. And so for me, it's just a full circle moment, coming back to the place of, if given the privilege and the opportunity to serve, to represent the people that I've sat at their tables, I've stayed at their homes, I've worshiped with these people for decades, and truthfully, that's kind of where my service actually started. I started preaching 23 years ago at Strangers Rest Baptist Church in Lake Como. And my church was very active, and my pastor at that time was very active in the community. So it gave us an opportunity to go out and just do outreach and just, block parties and all those kinds of things, just connecting with people and just really even giving people a sense of hope. And so that for me is just it would be a tremendous honor just to represent many of those neighbors in Como that I've known for years, whether it's, Mama Pat, who is like a godmother to me, or, Aunt Wanda, who I sang next to in the choir, or so many other people that I've worked with just throughout these years. And so I think that it is important, though it was a creative way to redraw those lines. I think it has made a transformational difference for the Como community. Yeah. And that's not a reflection on, any previous person that represented that community. I think it was just the nature of the beast that their voices were somewhat diminished. And so now, the key, honestly, to winning District 6 is going to go through Como.
Well, let's actually talk about your fraternity, Alpha Phi fraternity.
Sure.
I also know you're a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. How has that shaped you? Is that something you got involved in at school? And then how's that it shaped you? As obviously we have a lot of influential men in Fort Worth who has been a part of that fraternity.
Yeah. I am a proud Alpha. I'm actually, though I'm a life member of the organization, I just celebrated my 4th Alphaversary. So I've only been in since 2021. Alpha hasn't really shaped who I am. Alpha has been a connection point. When you think about men of this fraternity, there are a lot of great men doing a lot of great things. For me, when I think back, I didn't join, I attended Texas Wesleyan, which didn't have Greek organizations, and definitely didn't have any members of the Divine Nine on campus. And for me, when I thought about joining an organization such as this, there was just a common thread in many of the men that I had encountered throughout various stages of my life. I mean, I could just start naming names and it'd be like, oh, I didn't even know that they were an Alpha, but there were qualities of service, of advocacy, education, which is important to me. Those are just some of the tenets of the organization and the aims of, manly deeds, scholarship, love for all mankind, advocating for all people. Those were the things that were important to me. And it wasn't until 4 years ago that I was actually able to connect to the organization. Part of that was because, again, I went to school, Texas Wesleyan, and it wasn't an option there. But then I got married in my early 20s, had my daughter in 2006, my son in 2014. He's looking like, Dad, sorry. And so life just didn't provide the opportunity, but I was always connected to men that were a part of not just the organization nationally, but also here locally. And so when life provided me the opportunity to connect to the organization, I did so through the graduate chapter, Beta Tau Lambda. So I'm not one that's been in 25 years. I mean, if I had the opportunity of doing it back then, I would have, but it wasn't my reality. Yeah. And so, I'm grateful to be connected to just some amazing men who wholeheartedly embody the spirit of servanthood and community advocacy. And that's really what it's about for me.
Yeah. Well, I think a question I'd be interested in going into is, what does kind of Black empowerment in Fort Worth looks like with the tribulations that, the trials and tribulations that we're going through now? I mean, you see the NAACP having to move an event because it was held on a university. You're seeing Opal Lee's National Juneteenth Museum not getting the camaraderie that we should be celebrating that for. What will you do to kind of ensure that, the attacks on Black voices or Black success in Fort Worth can be stabilized and also elevated?
Yeah, I think one of the mantles, if I can use that term, that I carry is about taking people's voices into spaces and places that they ordinarily would not be heard. And I think when people know that there is someone, number one, who listens, number two, who cares, and number three, who's going to do something with the information, I think it gives people hope. I think we see a level of apathy and just really people just saying to heck with it, because you usually don't encounter those three things. You may have someone who listens. You may have or encounter somebody who cares. You may have somebody who wants to do something about a problem, but you rarely find all three. And those are the three things that I feel like that I carry with me every single day: to listen, to care, and to do something. And I think when we convince people and we show actually and demonstrate to people that I've listened, that I care, and that I'm going to do something about it, I think it causes people to say, you know what, my voice does matter. And we often criticize people for apathy and all of those kinds of things. But what have we given people to hope for, right? What have we given people to believe in and to trust? We have a lot of people who choose not to participate in elections. Why? Because they feel like all elected officials are the same. You're out for what is, best for you, or you're indebted to the people that put you in office. Well, listen, all I can speak for is Daryl Davis II. And I've approached this that the only people whose voices that matter to me are my neighbors and my community, those people who look like me and even those people who don't. We've got to make sure that we have that we give people something to hope for and to hope in, to know that we really can experience the change that we want to see. And right now, I think people just don't believe that we can experience what it is that we've always been hoping for. And I don't want to be overly critical, but I think we have to call a spade a spade. And even in Fort Worth, that is our reality, because oftentimes our elected officials, when the community and the neighborhoods have said, this is what we want, we've had people to say, well, this is what we're going to give you. When we talk about, again, going back to Ms. Jacqueline Craig, what came out of that was a race and culture task force, right? And we did this whole task force, this whole study about race relations in the city of Fort Worth. One of the things in particular that came out from that was a community oversight board for our police department. Right?
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
I was in favor of it.
Community oversight board of our police department. Instead, what did the city of Fort Worth decide to give us? We're going to give you an office of the police monitor. That's not what we asked for. And so that's what causes people who have felt disenfranchised, who have felt lost and left out. That's what causes them to say, you know what, it doesn't matter. But when they know, and I don't care if you're black, I don't care if you're brown, I don't care if you're gay, you're straight, it doesn't matter to me. What I want people to know is your voice matters. So I'm going to listen. I care about what's important to you, and I'm going to do something with that information. And I think that is what ultimately will cause people to feel empowered, to know that we have the right, we have the opportunity to put people in places where they're going to take our voices with them. That's really how we as a community began to elevate ourselves, by making sure that we've got the people that respect our values, the people that are going to advocate for us. When we put those people in office and we hold them accountable, then we know that not only are we going to do this on the school board, but we're also going to do this on city council. We're going to do it on the water board. We're going to do it on Tarrant County College board. We're going to do it in all of these places to make sure that we have people in those positions of power who are going to take our voices with them. So I think that's where it starts. And I think once we create that momentum, it just creates a groundswell to where now people rise up and we create the change that we want.
Well, I think this is a perfect spot to end on, and would love any last minute kind of actions, things you would like to say for listeners.
Yeah, more than anything, well, let me first say thank you. Like, this has been the highlight of my week. And I really just enjoy sharing this space with you all and just being able to have a conversation about me and, my upbringing and ultimately what I want to see here in Fort Worth. What I want more than anything is I want people to get involved. Number one, make sure that you vote. Develop a vote plan, whatever that is. Know when you're going to vote, know where you're going to vote, know who you're going to vote for. Do your research. Everybody in District 6 won't necessarily think that I'm their best choice, and I understand that. I think I'm their best choice, and my job is to try to help them see that I'm ultimately the best choice. But at the end of the day, their vote, their voice, but I want people to get involved. If people want to know more information about me, about our efforts, you can go to votedaryldavis.com. That's vote, DARYLDAVIS.com. You can learn about what it is that we are attempting to bring to District 6 in the city. You can also sign up to volunteer. There is a lot of money that you have to raise to run campaigns. And, you all did a story on or you talked about the Fort Worth Report and how much money was raised. Listen, I was a very, very, very small piece of that pie that was raised.
It's like some people weren't even mentioned.
Yeah. I was in the footnotes. Yeah. You had to kind of dig deep. But what we don't have in money, we hope to have in mobilizers. And so that's really what our campaign is about getting people involved. We have block walking every Saturday, and people are showing up. They're showing up and they're talking to their neighbors, and that's really what it's about. So I would encourage people to just do that. But most importantly, more than anything else, I would say, please vote. Because if we don't vote, we don't really have a right to complain, do we? So let's do our part in making sure that we get out and we exercise our right and our responsibility of voting.
So that was a conversation with City Council candidate for District 6, Daryl Davis. We appreciate him coming and sharing with us. As we talked about, it's hard to get your positions across and your personality and why you want to serve in little 1-minute clips, which we are often restricted to when running for office and going and speaking on panels and different forums during a candidate process. So it's always good to have a bigger format, longer format, interview kind of format where we can get to know the candidates so that people can participate in their civic duties of voting. I was appreciated his position of, if your vote, that it's important to vote, and his story that was something that he was raised with his grandparents, that he voted from the very beginning and encouraging people to vote. So we appreciate him coming and sharing with us today.
I love it. Well, it's time to move into our wins and losses. We start with our loss so that we can end on a high note. I'm going to dive right into my loss. My loss is this Fort Worth District 8 council seat debate. Did you see this debate? Did you hear about it?
I saw some stuff on social media about it. I went and read an article. I went and watched the video. So yes, I am aware.
So basically, Chris Nettles and challenger Peyton Jackson had a little scuffle back and forth. And it made it all the way to like live television on NBC and DFW, which is annoying to me because, one, I think Peyton Jackson is a fly in a china shop, and it's up to the Bulls to like act like she's a big deal. She's like a Beau French. She's just like, she's not as important as she really is. Peyton Jackson is trying to be a Tarrant County's Candace Owens, and that's what she's trying to be. I mean, when you have no economic mobility, but the red hand will pay you your bills, you end up talking like the Geppetto white man who has the strings on you. And so therefore, that's who you are. And poor Chris Nettles, because you stand up to mercy culture, you stand up to the Fort Worth way, you have a challenger, you have a brawler. And you know who else has a brawler? This is a common theme for Democrats, and this is my loss, is Jared Williams, even though he wasn't as aggressive as Chris Nettles, how is Marshall Hobbs a real candidate, and we're taking photos with him, Fort Worth council members, and we're allowing this crazy individual to have to be an option to be on your city council, and like, you think that's good for society. So my loss is that when Democrats stand up, a crazy right-wing person shows up, where Macy Hill, who's anti-LGBTQ and allowed us to not have the LGBTQ badge for our libraries, runs unopposed and gets the third most in funding. What I'm at a point of, I need a lot of progressives who don't have shots of, who are just trying to make noise in these seats. Every single person just needs to make noise in these seats, because that's ultimately these red wingers, Marshall Hobbs and Peyton Jackson, they're just getting paid to do this stuff, and ultimately end up empty-handed.
I don't know if my loss is going to be as fiery as all that, but and it is touching on something that I think I brought up as a loss the last go round. But HB 3187 has been scheduled for an upcoming House committee hearing. This is the transportation, basically reducing the funding for DART bill. And it has been scheduled for a committee hearing in the House, and there's groups of advocates for transit that are encouraging folks to take action, but that hearing will be on April 17th, and we will put in the show notes opportunities to communicate with your representatives to share with them why they should not be furthering this bill. You may ask, as I've stated before, but if you're not listening to every single pod, why we over in Tarrant County and in Fort Worth should care about what happens to DART. But we care about the region when it comes to transportation, and having a connected region and having service that allows us to connect to all of the places in the region. And specifically, DART has a partnership with Trinity Metro to run TRE, which I took twice in 2 weeks not too long ago, and it was jam-packed with people who work in Dallas or work in Fort Worth and make that commute back and forth and would like to continue to be able to do that on a train versus driving in their cars. And that partnership could be at risk with DART having to look for ways to cut their funding. And if they are forced to reduce their funding because of a bill like this, that could definitely be one of the first impacted services that would definitely negatively impact Fort Worth.
Yeah. Well, as we move into our wins, my win is that on April 19th, Fort Worth fights back a peaceful protest on Burke Burnett Park from 12 to 4 p.m. It's going to be ran by 5501 group. And so I believe this is what me and my wife have said. We need to attend at least one march every month for something we believe in. Because again, it is time for us to add up, the little hours that we can give, right? Like me and Ann, like this is our Sunday. This is what we do on Sunday. This is what we've been doing, what I've been doing on Sunday for 5 years. My entire Sunday goes to this because I believe the long-term effects of this is important for the things that we need to hold up. And I'm not asking you to be as crazy as me, but I'm asking if you can give 5 hours a month to an organization, to advocating for a grassroots group, to going to a march. Come with me. See me at the Fort Worth Fights Back peaceful protest on April 19th. Be a part of something. Don't allow to say, oh, this is just how it's going to work and this is who we're going to be. Because if they take Tarrant County, and obviously our Fort Worth leaders are handing it to them, we lost. Tarrant County is vital to the democracy of our country, and we have to stand up.
So it's also hosted by Indivisible 12, which is local organizers here in Fort Worth, and Hands Off. And it is from 12 noon until 4 p.m. in Burt Burnett Park. And they'll be marching as well as activities in the park itself. So I've heard from a few people that say, I'm not able to march, but I've told them that there's other things to do there besides marching, and there'll be people to hear from as well. So encourage everybody who is able to participate in that. So my win is that we saw a story. We've been complaining a little bit about how Tarrant County Public Health has handled measles outbreaks and all of that, and that the reductions in public health and all of that. But I want to ask the question, are you smarter than a fifth grader, Tarrant County Public Health? Because there is a group of fifth graders at Westlake Academy who decided to study pandemics. And in their studying of pandemics, they became aware of the measles outbreak and the fact that with vaccination, these things can be stemmed. And instead of sitting around and waiting until an outbreak happens and telling people how to identify that they're sick after the fact and how to get support and help after being sick, they are encouraging folks to learn about preventative measures. And so we have fifth graders telling us that we should get vaccinated in order to stem another outbreak, pandemic-y type situation like we could have with measles, like we had with COVID. So my win is fifth graders standing up, doing research, and spreading the word about things that we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, there you go with another episode of the 817 podcast. We look forward to seeing you guys. We'll be off next week due to Easter, but we'll be back with possibly another interview with another candidate. Have a great weekend and a happy holiday.
Follow us like double tap.